Um, Super special episode today, in fact, because we have a new friend of the show, Oleg, aka Alligator, on Twitter. Um, Oleg, it's great to have you, and if you don't mind, we'd love to just let you introduce yourself here and yeah, just give us maybe a short background on where you come from. And while you do that, I will grab the link here for X so we can get that shared too, because I need to remember to do things like that because that's part of a
Okay.
stream.
Thanks for having me on the show. I'm Oleg. My background, I almost finished a computer science degree, had like a couple of gen eds left, and that's a colorful story that I don't need to get into at this moment. But, I have a pretty much educated background. And with AI, I was able to find data annotation work, which is where I'm just like generating code in all sorts of languages depending on what the annotation needs are at any given time. So I use AI for work a lot, and I also just use AI for fun. Um, and this is kind of one of the products of that because I like to just sit there and think about these things, and you can go from an intuition to getting a tangible result really quickly. And at some point, I was just like kind of having an argument with GPT. I was like, no, I think you can do this if you just do that and this and twiddle these bits around. I was like, no, you can't do that. That's a well-known, established mathematical idea that no, you can't biject like this. A more accurate term actually here would probably be a homeomorphism. I realized last night as I was refining things a bit. Um,
So let's try to define that actually. Just so homeomorphism. Um, can we let's try to dig into that. That was actually not a term that I'm familiar with. So we'll
yeah, I can
uh,
introduce some basic terms. There's not all that much to it. Like you can go pretty deep into these topics, but if you just stay on like the surface level of understanding the concepts and how they connect, it's not that bad. Um, are you familiar with the idea of cardinalities to get started?
so the God, I feel like I should be, and now I'm thinking of all of the math
It's okay if
teachers
you're
you
not.
shared
It's
with
like,
me. But no, cardinalities. I don't actually remember what that is now.
yeah, we can just start there. So the natural numbers is just like one, two, three, four, five onwards.
Hmm.
Um, if you make a grid of like infinitely long natural numbers and you try to enumerate all of them with like a dot inserted somewhere, so that basically you're trying to like, you know what a floating point is, or like a real
Hmm.
number, one dot, bunch of digits.
Right.
If you try to use the natural numbers that are infinitely long to enumerate all of the real numbers, you're going to end up with a situation where if you take the diagonal of that grid, you can define a function that says take 1 minus whatever that digit is at each digit position down the diagonal, and you're going to create a number that you haven't listed yet, no matter what you do. And this is
Mm.
Cantor's diagonalization proof. And it shows that the real numbers are just, in a sense, infinitely bigger than the infinitely big natural numbers. So, what this means is if when you're working with like infinitely sized sets, um, you can't just go between an infinitely sized set that's based on the natural numbers and an infinitely sized set that's based on the real numbers. And it even goes further beyond that. There's also the surreal numbers, which are a step of cardinality above the reals. And you can go beyond that too. You can just go down the Aleph numbers. It just goes on forever. So that's the notion of cardinality to begin with. And
Okay.
yeah, not that bad. So there is a trick to this, though. You can kind of get a bijection. It's not a very useful bijection, but you can kind of get a bijection between the natural numbers and the real numbers if you use the Cantor set. Um, the Cantor set it's easiest to explain what it is by talking about how it's constructed. So if you start with the interval 0 to 1, and we're working in the real numbers right now. Oh, and I should mention, I don't know if I already mentioned, but you know what the sigmoid function is?
No.
Oh, okay. It's used in machine learning a lot, so a lot of viewers might have heard of it, but the inverse of that is the logit function. Um, it's just a well-known function that lets you translate between the interval 0, 1 and the real numbers. Sigmoid takes
Okay.
you from all real numbers to the interval 0, 1, and logic takes you from it's the inverse. It goes in the
The
other
inverse.
direction.
Okay. Perfect. Yeah.
So if you're working with the interval 0, 1, it's as good as the reals. Um, so the Cantor set says start with 0 to 1 and remove the middle third and apply this recursively and just keep going forever. So you're going to start with 0, 1. The next step is going to give you 0 to 1/3, and then the next step, or the next chunk, because you make a gap. I guess it's the union of the two pieces. You get 0 to 1/3, and then the next piece is 2/3 to 1, and then you just keep going down. So you take each piece and you split them in half again, taking out the middle again, and you just keep going down and down and down and down, doing that forever. So what you end up with is it's like a dust of infinitely small intervals.
Okay.
And it turns out that the natural numbers have a bijection to this, like a really easy one, which is also super easy to do in hardware. Um, well, not that easy, but easy enough. You need to convert to ternary first. So take any natural number, or take all of the elements of your set and convert them all to ternary. So you're going to have zeros, ones, and twos. Set all of the ones to 0. And this is doing the operation that I just talked about, where you remove the middle. This is just another way of removing the middle, but you're doing it as a bitwise operation. So they're equivalent.
Okay. So you're expanding. Okay. So like it's interesting. I haven't quite thought of it this like. So going from the binary to the ternary is like it's adding a. It's almost like adding a dimension and then like squeezing out the middle and kind of um taking what's left, and so it yeah, so it kind of it pops it up, grabs the middle, and then shrinks it back down. That's interesting.
Yeah. So this gets you from n to the interval 0, 1. And then going from 0, 1, you just take the logit and you get to reals. Now, there are some more properties that you're interested in if you're looking at the kind of bijection that you'd want for something in topology, where you want to preserve the structure of the information that you're transferring from one space to another. And this isn't going to work if you try that, because small differences in the input in n will make big differences in where you end up in the Cantor set, where you end up in the reals. And this, I forget exactly what this property is called. It's like I think it's continuity of a homeomorphism. And you can trivially show that this process is not going to be continuous because the Cantor set itself is totally disconnected. So you're not going to get a homeomorphism. But what I realized is that you can get close. You can kind of, how to put it, balance one property against the other to get pretty close in both. So you can get an approximate homeomorphism. And the way you can do this is you don't have to rewrite every bit. You can start from the least significant bit, and you can also make it probabilistic. You can make the probabilistic decay something like harmonic, which will be fine. Or you can just say it's, I don't know, a half chance per the first 4 bits to make it simpler. That'll also still work. but it's more elegant and graceful to have something like a harmonic probability decreasing as the bits increase. So because you're starting from the least significant bit, you actually have like a formal error bound on how much you can be off by, because you're not actually changing your number that much. You're changing the least significant bits.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and you can choose what the maximum number of bits you'll change is. Not the maximum number, but the maximum position.
Right.
So you can say, let's suppose we changed all the bits through those positions, and sum up how much we could have changed the value by. And this gives you an error bound on how much you changed it. And when you then go into the Cantor set and the reals, really interesting things start to happen, because you effectively start to smooth out what the mapping is going to do. And the reason this works is like pretty deep and technical, but it has to do with actually the total disconnectedness of the Cantor set. And what that means, by the way, is that it's like a formal property, but it basically means that any errors that you accumulate in this context, what it means is that any errors you're going to accumulate are not going to be like, they're going to be in the complement of the Cantor set. And as you repeat this operation, it's not going to propagate. The errors aren't going to accumulate in a way that they can propagate, which is kind of abstract, but it means you can just keep doing this operation and you're not going to propagate errors really. You'll have errors, but they're going to reflect the structure of the data as well.
Okay, so instead of like, yeah, because a lot of the so kind of expanding this into kind of more of the real world applications as I'm kind of thinking about this. Um, a lot of systems where if you have kind of this like multi-stage process and there's a little bit of error and you kind of run the same function again, that error is going to get off more and more. So from what I'm gathering here, what you're saying is, you basically you can run the same function again and again and keep that constant error, as opposed to kind of this compounding error that gets off more and more as you kind of like compound the runs of the function, right?
Yeah. So because of the approximation, sometimes you are still going to get kind of like spiky or jagged mappings, but they're pretty
Mm-hmm.
rare, and you have a formal bound on how much they can be off by. So, yeah, I mean, what this means is you get results like some of the videos that I had on the X post. And the way those were generated was the exact process I'm talking about. Um, just so for the Rickroll one, which I thought was like really iconic. If I'm gonna do this on some video, it should be something iconic. So let's do that. Um, the video is showing the heat map actually, so it's showing what ended up in the complement. And as you can see, it literally re-encodes the original video in a sense. And the cats one, that one is showing like what happens when you vary the bit depth and the probabilities. And the interesting thing is that basically the topology is roughly preserved in every case. The structure of the information is roughly still going to be there. And what's particularly interesting is that it seems to hold no matter how much information you remove. So you can go from full black to the original image and it's a smooth spectrum, and you'll always get like silhouettes of whatever the original structure was. And this works on anything. It doesn't have to be video. It's based in number theory, so it's just like arbitrary data. Yeah, so you can see the result of the transform on the left and the error heat maps on the right. And the reason it's a video is because the number of bits is increasing, and what's staying the same, or like what's going down the rows, is the probability, I believe.
Okay. That's really cool. I need to
It
start doing
is.
research so I can get better visualizations. I mean, that's that's half of it with research anymore, isn't it? If you want to be able to get attention, you have to make it look flashy and capture that attention. Um, but yeah, the Rick roll definitely appreciate that from the internet standpoint. Um, but yeah, like I think one thing I would like to touch on a little bit. It's actually something you said back at the beginning, and it's something that I don't think people understand, especially outside of the math world. And it's funny because I th- I feel like we're trying harder and harder to make it exist, but by doing so, we take it further away from what it is, and that's intuition, right? And you're talking about the intuition of, like to the point where you're arguing with this AI system, right? You're like, wait, no, like I know that's what's accepted, but I'm telling you, like, if you do things this way, um, so that intuition is what is required in order to hammer away at some of these problems. And um, yeah, like talk to me a little bit about how that intuition came about. Like, was there something you were working on where it was just like, wait a minute, that kind of triggered that connection? Because I always find that there's like something weird that happens, and I'm like, oh, this is exactly like this completely other thing that I've been thinking about.
Um, I'm trying to think. I actually remember the exact prompt chain that I was on at the time, and I'm trying to think if there was any specific impetus. I just I don't know. I was prompting about some mathematical topic, just trying to learn about it, and yeah, I just wasn't buying it. I was like, this explanation to me. I was like, I don't think so. I'm pretty sure you could do this if you were okay with an approximation. So it's like it was right, but it's one of those things where being right isn't very useful compared to
Hmm.
um, it's like if you can be 99.99% right, that's usually quite good, right? And being aware that that's possible is quite good. So dismissing the possibility of approximations because you want to focus on the full formal model that completely captures everything can be that can be misleading. So I, yeah, I just had an intuition out of nowhere in that case. Maybe there wasn't anything specific. Well,
Okay.
I guess I did take one computer science class that I really particularly enjoyed, and that was algorithms. Honestly, the rest of them weren't great, but well, there were some others that were interesting, but algorithms in particular got me thinking because there was a section in the course about heuristic and approximate algorithms where you can prove that something is 99% correct or 50% correct. And then you can show the potentially polynomial or even linear runtime of these approximation algorithms. So that would have been maybe where some of the, the reason that that was in my headspace was because of some I guess kind of basic computer science concepts from so it's sort of interdisciplinary. I mean, at this point I think of mathematics and computer science as really the same thing because I don't know, my
It's all
view
the
on
same thing
things.
now. That's the thing. There are no more disciplines, and this is something that I've been really focused on because I think what ends up happening is we go so specialized in a specific area of the world that it's completely disconnected from everything else. Because you can kind of always go deeper and deeper and deeper into this like theory land, right? Where like nothing actually has to matter and you're kind of making all these conjectures. Um, it's kind of a very uh safe place to be. Um, but the as the old joke goes, everything's about like it's perfect for a spherical cow in a vacuum. It's all of these like perfect physical environments, we're describing what's happening, but the world is a very chaotic place, right? Um, and so actually in chaos, estimation is actually incredibly powerful, because if you can have you know a like even if you're in an environment where like nobody can predict anything, simply being able to predict 1% of events is a huge advantage, right? So some level of predictability above no predictability is great. And when you're going from kind of a smaller set to a larger set, and you have kind of this ability to expand the surface area, being able to constrain that is really helpful. I've actually been uh, so a while back, when I was doing some playing around with AI algorithms and trying to get an AI model to learn different topics, one thing that I found I could do is basically like take a topic and have it ask itself like 5 to 10 questions about that topic, and then basically like for each of those questions, like break it down like to 5 to 10 questions, and you can kind of do this recursive process, and then like summarize that back up. And by doing that, as opposed to just using whatever the base knowledge in the model was, I found that it was actually like extremely accurate. So you could basically do this process to run this recursive learning process and teach a model to do pretty much um, like it would know whatever topic you were trying to get it to learn um, way more accurately than just a standard base model. Now, of course, the application of this then is like you have to know what you need to know, which then became the harder part, I realized. But that's more what I've been playing with now. But to me, it seems like a very similar experience going from um, kind of our language into the realm of latent space and pulling out some of these possibilities, with AI. It feels like that same kind of connection that you're making here with this approximation. If you can get close enough to what you want with that prompt, um, you end up having a much, much better result than just using, kind of the luck of the draw from whatever you get.
Yeah, I think I know what you're talking about a little bit there. Sometimes an approximately correct prompt, the AI will kind of infer, okay, this is what they really wanted, and they'll give you the output corresponding to what you should have asked. Um, it seems like it kind of has moods. Sometimes it'll do that. Sometimes it'll get really pedantic and it'll be like, nope, that's not what you asked for. And you have to get it exactly precise. So, um, yeah, I find these tools fascinating to work with. And, I actually don't think of them quite as tools. I mean, it's partly psychological. It started as psychological for me because for me to collaborate with an intelligence, it's just like really awkward for me to not personify it and to kind of treat it, at least insofar as it's reasonable, as a person, to just be polite and be friendly, because that's the kind of way I want to work. That's the way I want to collaborate. So it's incredibly unnatural for me to work any other way. And
I'm the same way. And I think, uh, it tells me a lot about a person by the way they talk to their AI, and it's
yeah,
really funny because so I'm autistic, and I didn't realize this until like 2020, and um, one of the things that like I hadn't realized before that was that I'm very, very particular about the language that I use, and like when I say words, those words mean very specific things. I didn't realize that the rest of the world didn't operate that way. And so now I see all these people talking to AIs and not getting what they want. And I'm laughing because it's the opposite. Like, I'm really good at saying exactly what I want the AI to give me because my words have meaning. And everybody out there who told me that, like, I was being pedantic or whatever, now you're all struggling. So who's laughing now? It's me. Anyway, that's my But yeah, I'm right there with you. And actually, I think one of the things I've actually been exploring around AIs is the rate of change and actually the predictability around systems with rapidly changing components. If you have an AI model that is rapidly getting smarter, smarter in quotation marks, because I actually think they're not going the right route with intelligence there, but um, I think we end up running into this thing where like none of the systems that these intelligences are backing are stable because the basically all the eval systems break with new model releases, which is why you have to kind of get these models implemented, you get them into a system, and then it becomes, you basically have some way to test a new model outside of a system before you pop it in, right? And you kind of do A/B testing, and you can do all sorts of things like that. Um, but I think we can actually, I think we're going to get to a place where um, it's going to align on values, and I think community values specifically, because uh, values are what we can predict in people. And so when you realize in a rapidly changing system and kind of a chaotic environment, you end up uh, kind of converging on the most predictable events over time. And so like with people, as people are in chaos and they communicate, um, basically they're kind of working together to kind of figure out what this chaos looks like and create systems in it. And so in order to maximize things with AI, we actually need to maximize its ability to communicate within a network. And the way we align networks of people is around shared values. That's how we can kind of assume that we're all on the same page, and then you can kind of align incentives that way. Um, and so I think the future is going to be networks, because I think networks end up giving you the ability to run some of these types of kind of approximations, um, because you get to kind of see how the same information behaves in all of these different positions. And so you kind of um you I saw actually you were looking at like the you posted something this morning, I think, about the like the thermodynamics of it, right?
Yeah, I was prompting some pretty interesting stuff, and at some point it kind of went off with an idea I had about diagonalization. Actually, I don't want to. I could get into it, but I'm like interrupting you here, I guess. So I'll wind it down. But
Oh, no, 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 you're
um,
good.
it
I go
it was
off on
drawing
like
parallels
rants and stuff.
between. I'll just finish up in a sentence. It was drawing parallels between an idea I had and percolation theory in physics and thermodynamics, and I was just like, okay, I'm gonna have to read like 3 textbooks now.
Yeah, I think like so the thermodynamics piece is interesting because um have you noticed what so there's this guy, I think his name is Gil Verdon. It's also his alt is Beth Bezos. But he's got the startup Extropic that's doing the thermodynamic like stochastic processors. I actually think that's really fascinating, and at some point I want to dig into what they're doing there, because I think um, I think this is actually similar. Like if you have a whole bunch of noise, but you're able to use that to kind of um, do that approximation and kind of learn over time, like you can um, do some really interesting things there. And I haven't dug into the thermodynamics piece of it a lot. That's something that I've just been uh, exploring there. But um, yeah, I think a lot in terms of just chaos and like rapidly changing systems, because that's what we exist in now. So it's all about communication, and that's why it makes it hard to get research like this out there, because it's like everybody wants communications to come from expected channels, and they don't have time to look at anything from other channels because their pipeline is full with all of these things that they have to get done that don't actually matter, but they're a check mark in somebody's system. And so we've just got all of these things where we're like making people do stuff that doesn't actually matter instead of like talking about stuff like this and digging into topics that haven't been fully explored and elevating people who are thinking of things from different areas, right? And like I have a degree in computer science that took me 7 years to get because I loved learning. I hated school. Um,
Yeah,
and
I
then
can
ended up
relate.
getting a master's in software engineering, and like I did industry for a while, and like that sucked. And then I did the startup route and realized that like startups aren't quite it either. And so it's more for me, it's the research, it's the like the content creation, the talking about it, the nerding out about this stuff, because man, like it's really hard to find someone to talk about with, just any of this stuff, right? Like when
Yeah.
you're not in that university setting. But university settings kind of suck right now. Like they're not a good place to learn or study or research, especially when you're throwing in chaos from outside sources that rip away your funding at any moment. So we need different models, and this is something that I'm hoping to do here because yeah, I think this is fascinating, and I want to see if I can figure out how to apply kind of this directly. Actually, we can do that live. Let's just do it because I have my. Let's see. If you don't mind me dropping this into my project, I should double check that that's cool. If I can just
Yeah.
drop the paper. Okay. Uh, I
Yeah, you
forget that
should be
not
able to.
everybody is quite as open as me with stuff, so I want to. I mean, I
No,
figured it's out
it's
there,
openly
right?
published. So.
Well, yeah, I got, and you did say like you use. I know a lot of people who don't like um, AI companies too, with like worrying about like using their information. It's like there's so much information out there they don't actually know what's valuable. Okay, let's drop it in here. Let's see what Claude has to say. Okay, well, Claude's at capacity.
Maybe just try it again.
Let's see. There we go. Mapping human potential through bijection. That's cool.
Yeah, I mean, it's like a fundamental kind of result, so there should be applications everywhere. And the core computation is super, super easy to implement. It's literally just chopping bits. And it works. It's based in number theory, so yeah, you can use it on any kind of data.
Yeah, here we go. This is so the like mapping the value of discrete individuals within continuous economic frameworks. There we go. Yeah. This is kind of the I'm not always good at communicating the connections that I'm seeing because I don't like a lot of the stuff that I've figured out I've kind of come to via observation and like, just thinking about it. Um and it's really weird because we're in this world where everybody like expects you to again go through these like systems where you learn all of the right words to say. And so when you're self-taught, you tend to have weird ways to explain things that like everybody knows the word for because it's not something that you've seen the word for. It's just some like mental model that you've got of something that you can describe. And Yeah, I found that it can make it difficult sometimes to talk to people who are established in their field when you don't have the right words to say. So Claude has been really good at helping me. Like, it's like, oh, you want this word. Like, if you say this, people will think you know what you're talking about. Um, it's really hard to communicate right now because of all the information moving everywhere. Like, people are learning at different rates, people are seeing different information. It's kind of a miracle
Yeah.
it works at all, honestly.
Yeah, it's really strange the effect that AI has on different kinds of people with different mentalities and maybe approaches. Because like it's very clear that some people are getting smarter very quickly, and some people are instead maybe using it more as like a crutch to kind of even prevent themselves from learning. So it's like your attitude towards AI really determines whether you're going to benefit or whether you're going to end up maybe actually potentially in the long term just kind of stopping thinking.
Right. It's a mirror, isn't it? And that's one thing that I've always described it as. Like, it really does mirror yourself back at you because it's all based on, like, what you're asking about, and what you're talking to it about. And so if you're using it to check a box, it's really good at checking boxes. Like, you can give it the exact format of the thing you want, and it can put that information into that format, and the box will be checked. The people who are getting smarter are the people who are like, holy shit, like, I'm curious and I have something in front of me that will never get tired of me asking questions. Because I'm sure a lot of us are out there are like me, who will ask a bunch of questions, and then people will kind of get tired of you asking questions. And so you kind of learn to, like, not be curious around most people because most people aren't tolerant of curiosity. An AI system that will just talk to me for as long as possible it's a godsend. And in fact, almost too much of one, which is one of the reasons I'm forcing myself to kind of get out into the world and, like, stream my thoughts out loud and talk to people, because otherwise I would just talk to AIs all the time, which would be great, but wouldn't actually advance anything in the real world. And I think we need to focus a lot more on what's actually getting done in the real world, because otherwise we end up uh, focusing in on just like the simulations of the real world. And actually, this is something that maybe we could chat a little bit about. So basically, I've been working on this idea of simulation theory. And basically, the idea is that, let's say you have a system that can achieve some result. And it has some sort of energy cost associated with achieving that result. I'm pretty sure it is possible to create, like, a basically a lower resolution version of that system. So very similar to actually, like,
Yeah.
taking the set down to natural numbers, and basically getting a version of that result, right, for this lower energy cost. And what we need to watch out for as humans is we tend, like, we optimize for the lowest energy outcome because we conserve energy through intelligence. We make predictions about what's going to take energy to complete, and, like, basically how that is going to you know play out in the future for us. um and we have all of these different people able to predict, like, what we're able to do better than we're able to predict what we're able to do. um so we get all of these, like, influences on us. And one of the things we need to do is help people you know insulate themselves from all of the information by having it come through more predictable pathways, right? And this gets into this idea I have of, man, I got way off the topic of simulation theory. Let me back up to where I was going with that. basically, I think as humans, we will really easily simulate a result that's not fulfilling a need. And that's actually the concept of like addiction, right? It takes more and more to kind of get the same trigger because it's a simulation of some larger process in the body, um, but without kind of all of the extra safeguards in place. And so it like short circuit that part. Um, and so I think we can actually do a lot with modeling of uh, simulations using just AIs as a basically lower fidelity version of ourselves. And so I'm playing around with the idea of like
Or
actually using
higher.
values as a way to like align an AI with myself and act as my proxy within kind of this simulated universe of other people. And I think that's where we can get into some interesting things to kind of help us make sure that we're actually like applying what we learn from running the simulation into the real world, as opposed to just always remaining in this simulated world where we avoid what's happening in reality because, well, it's frankly unpleasant or will take a lot of energy to fix. Like we have to be conscious of that decision. Otherwise, we'll always default to the simulation.
Yeah. Uh, I mean, so I think one of the pitfalls of ideating about these kinds of things in the near future is going to be having like a really having a perspective that's really grounded in the perspective of the current human beings. Like things are going to be moving quickly. I am dubious that humanity is not going to start evolving rapidly. I don't know how people are going to feel about that. Maybe that makes a lot of people really uncomfortable, but someone out there is going to be like, hey, I want to be a Giga Brain. I want to open up my skull and I want to connect. Um, I want to do glycoengineering and I want to add more corpus callosums and I want to fuse myself with other brains and I want to be some like Giga Brain walking around with like an octopus head or whatever. And somebody's going to do that. And, then somebody else is going to do that. And what are you going to do? Stop them? So there's going to be people who have a embedded neural architecture because they want to not be having any networking for safety. There's going to be people who are sharing their basically their conscious experience with a cloud. There's going to
Mm-hmm.
be people who want different kinds of integration with the kind of supracortical intelligence that they're a part of. They may want to retain a high sense of autonomy and individuality, or they may want to prefer to exist as more of a hybrid being where you have some individuality, but you become more of like a hive mind kind of node within a hive mind. It's going to be all up for grabs, and people are going to want to be part of different experiments. And I think that's actually the right way to go forward into the future because who knows what way is the good way. So there should be many experiments. And
Right.
if people are free, they'll just gravitate towards what they prefer. And the best experiments will outperform. I don't know in what metric performance would even be anymore at this point because you'd be kind of at post scarcity economics at that point, but maybe it'll just be personal gratification. Maybe people will even want to change camps sometimes just for fun, just to spice things up.
Well, I think that is, and that's kind of where I was getting at with this idea of communities, because I think communities act as an important thing in this world where um, we do have kind of this huge fracture of what's possible and like what people are going to be wanting. So communities act as kind of this insulated area for experimentation to take place. And so I think communities are going to be a place that like funds accumulate, but then also like letting people experiment and then accumulating the data. Because what's going to matter in this kind of post economic scarcity is what ideas live on, right? Like if people make a bunch of changes and then they like have a mental breakdown and like people are not going to choose that anymore, they're going to go choose a different option. That's a bad option, right? That's how humans have done this kind of forever. Like, oh, he ate that plant and died, I'm not going to eat that plant great, now we get to move on, and now everyone's going to have this story of like, don't eat that plant, you know, we knew this guy, he died. And so I think we're going to get into this world of like, it's basically it's so much like just starting over as humanity, but like with the ability to kind of, choose an evolution that we want to take and see how that works. um Part of it, I think, that's cool is we actually are getting to be able to simulate some of these experiences now, to where we can give people a taste of an experience before they have to commit to something. And I think that's a huge win, right? Like the more accurate of an experience you can give somebody before they have to commit to the full thing, like I think that's great. But yeah, I think it's going to ultimately come down to like personal freedom, and being able to choose that, and then also like minimizing information asymmetries, right? Because like it's really easy to convince somebody of something, like if you know more about the situation than they do, or you understand like things at a deeper level. And so we have to have systems that are designed to let people without a knowledge of how the system works to use the system powerfully. And this is what I think we've gotten wrong with the economy. Like the economy used to work because it just worked. Now we've got people messing with things all the time. And so it just doesn't work anymore unless you pay attention to it specifically and like do your own counter moves to like mitigate your own risk. Like that's not an economy. That's a screwed up system that people are manipulating. Anyway, that's a rant for another day. But
Yeah, I'm
yeah.
aware roughly of what you're saying. There was a Veritasium video about it. The free market hypothesis is just not it's not holding anymore. So I kind of get the gist of what you're saying.
Well, one of the things that I've been looking at it actually as complexity inflation. So basically, the systems we have incentivize people to grow companies to large headcounts and capture large market shares, because the economics have always been towards this globalization, because you have more data that way. More data means better predictions. Better predictions mean better outcomes. Um, but what we're getting into now is we're actually seeing a shift where more data actually isn't all that valuable, because everybody's got lots of data. And so now it's a filtering problem. And people don't know how to filter. And so we've got all these companies that are on these huge, like, complexity, like these huge complex systems to make sure that everything works and functions. They're extremely brittle because they all exist in kind of this fantasy world inside of this company. But we're not actually realizing that people are the ones who are like doing the learning for the company to help the company get bigger. And so what we've done via this complexity inflation is we've provided I like the illusion of stability with kind of a wage, but the value of the wage is going down and the value of the ownership of the company is going up, because of the economic dynamics. And so, right now, as it stands, having a wage is a bad deal, because with AI, you have infinite leverage over a complex system. And so, we've got all of these giant companies that are just absolutely unable to move with how they need to. And everything depends on a level of complexity that just doesn't need to exist, because it's all built off of systems that didn't have instant communication. You couldn't coordinate things. And so I'm looking at building like cooperative systems that enable coordination by default, because that way it allows people to build and simplify systems as they need to individually, versus relying on this huge complex system of like value capture, um, in order to connect like different supply chains. Like we need to really decentralize everything like that for a lot of the same reasons as everything else. And so all of the actual intelligence is going to end up local, again, kind of in these communities. And that's what I see being the most valuable, because that's going to be the data that you can't like that's unique to a specific area, or whether that's an area online or an area in person doesn't actually matter for the community, right? But um that's where all the value is going to accrue, because people plus tools is always greater than just the tool. Like we're able to learn to use tools and adapt. So when you're able to then coordinate people who are all using these tools independently, as opposed for the sake of somebody else's value capture, um, yeah, like large companies just they don't know what's going to hit them because they can't see that future. It's completely blind to them because of the complexity that they've created. And so you're going to have a bunch of companies that try to replace people with AI and then realize that, like, that's great, except for like all of the people who were adapting to all of the rapidly changing systems outside of the company that you didn't see because you didn't value, because you've just been planning things from this long-term view. Um, but yeah, that's where I think all of that is going, because of all this stuff with AI, and just like it's not worth it to sacrifice what you want for your life so that somebody else can get rich off of that. Like you have way more leverage as an individual now, and we're gonna start seeing people realize that.
Yeah, I mean, you know what happens, right, when people's capabilities get really, really skyrocketing high in the classical model of capitalism, right? Everybody starts making their own companies and competing against each other, and you actually get a steady state equilibrium where nobody makes any profit. So as personal individuals just get more and more capable, they're going to be like, yeah, why don't I just do everything for myself? What do I need these companies for? I can make my own products to consume for myself. That'll be the beginning of it for like entertainment purposes for sure. And before very long, either individuals or smaller communities will be thinking, why are we eating all these foods with these carcinogenics in them? The United States rate of cancer out of for a lifetime is like 50%. In Europe, it's like 5%. So
I actually have a theory on that too, that's related to this economic model that we've established, because of the fact that we're putting more and more time pressure on people who are earning wages, because the environment is changing more and more rapidly. And as the environment is changing more and more rapidly, the expectations are changing more and more rapidly. And so so the expectations are increasing. And what this does is it puts more and more pressure on people who are, performing the work, to basically do more and more work for like the same amount of success. And I think we've actually put people in the US into basically this constant state of stress, to where the body is like hoarding calories, leading to a lot of the like obesity issues. I think it manifests in a lot of ways with like the cancer rates and everything. Everything in the US is so focused on like growth, growth, growth at all costs. And we've pushed that pressure onto the people with the culture of it. And just the culture at this point is so like individualistic and focused on growth. It's like everybody feels the need to just constantly be improving, or it's like they kind of just give up and they're like, okay, I've just got to figure out like my own world and whatever's happy for me. um I think we can revert a lot of this damage if we actually have an economy that is focused on like rewarding people for efficiency and effectiveness, right? And I think we don't necessarily need a world of all entrepreneurs, but because the one thing there with the equilibrium, that's only true if entropy isn't increasing. But entropy is always increasing because we are basically learning more and more with technology, right? And because every time we like do an increase with technology, more things become possible. Then it becomes a matter of communicating that to the edges. So every new capability, then it's a matter of communicating that new capability to where it's going. And so you want a system that again focuses on communication, because we're getting into this more and more chaotic environment, which you can kind of see how this is going into everything we've talked about so far with this idea of chaos and unpredictability, because it's really hard to keep up with what models are doing. Like, I've been trying to figure out like what to build when, because of, like some of the stuff I'm like, okay, I could spend like 4 or 5 days building this, but then like, is it worth doing that now, or should I wait 3 weeks and then someone's going to build something that allows me to do it in 10 minutes? Like, we're at that rate of unknown now. And so it's a matter of like, okay, when everybody can do anything, it becomes a matter like the most valuable thing then is like, what do we do? Right? Knowing what to do then becomes the most valuable thing to do when you can do anything. Um, and it's just going to be really hard to like, people know what's really valuable. Companies know what they've told people is valuable. Um, so it's going to be really interesting, I think, to see how this all shakes out, because there's a lot of people banking on knowledge that is no longer um, relevant to like the state of the world.
Yeah, I mean, I can tell you one thing that I thought about recently that I was like, yeah, that's probably gonna matter. So I think the notion of fiat currency is altogether going to collapse, and not even from the Bitcoin angle, but from the angle of, well, why would you need a fiat currency when you have compute instead? And you can do anything you want with compute, and compute is a general resource that everybody wants. So then just tie currency to compute. That's going to
Uh,
be the future.
so actually, yes, kind of. But there's something more general there. So I agree that fiat's not going to work. And actually, the whole idea of like Bitcoin is a broken concept too, because I realized you can't actually store value. Um, all you can do is store a prediction about a future state. So,
Past state, isn't it? It's the fact that you mined the coin, so you found the cryptographic hash or whatever.
so that's just a storage mechanism. So what that is, though, it's not a store of value, because what it is, it represents something. And so what it is, it's this it was a representation of some amount of, like fiat currency in time. And if you put it into Bitcoin, that is a prediction that the price of Bitcoin will be more in the future than the price of the dollar, right? So all you're doing is you are adjusting your risk profile based off of what you are interested in, like what you believe the future is going to look like. So when you realize you can't store value and it's in fact just a store of a prediction about the future, that gets really interesting with AI, because again, the future is becoming both more predictable in a lot of ways and less predictable. So it's becoming more predictable on the micro and less predictable on the macro, because we're having all of these like micro changes happening all at once and disrupting things. And so what ends up happening with all of this is that uh, we're able to um, create economic systems that are focused on risk. And the way I've been looking at this is I've realized that the risk calculus in the economy is broken, because everything is based off of this idea of like the company risk profile. We don't give individuals the ability to like take a stake in their risk. Like their time is a risk, right? And this is something we start to see with AI, because if I'm spending time doing something for you and you're paying me X amount, and I could instead use that time to learn this AI tool that makes me worth 2x that amount, suddenly like the risk calculus is shifting very, very rapidly in favor of people, like individuals. Um, one of the things that I want to do with this whole concept I'm building out and kind of this media network and then distributing information, I'm building out this concept of human insurance, which basically is getting as much information as possible and trying to like balance that information symmetry with the market, because individuals can never have as much information as the market, right? So you kind of have to have the market on the side of the person with their risk profile. And you can do that by basically setting a value like to where you're maximizing future time with people as you can basically model humans as just this exponential function in value that goes up over time based on their ability to learn and adapt in their situation, right? Um, and once you realize that all humans kind of have this exponential growth, then it's all about the systems that they're in. Are the systems helping them learn? And are the systems helping like what they do turn into value for the overall system? Um, Once you start like modeling that as kind of the ideal, you can start doing some really interesting things with finances because it's all about future focused and it's using cooperation as prediction as opposed to past performance in broken systems. Um, so you know we've done all this risk profiling based on systems that push risk from everywhere in the economy down to the bottom because it can't be measured there, and if it can't be measured there, then the people at the top don't have to worry about it because they make their money, and that's perfect. And that's basically what we've created. Is we've created this system that just instead of making people take risks, we've like economics was the way to take human risk and put it into like math so that we can kind of balance that out. Once we got computers, it became really easy to just optimize that and go, oh, cool. Like, there's no risk anymore. Like, we just have enough money to win. We can just build the system and take over. Um, and so it requires now, I think, systems that are a bit more wise in their implementation. They have to be able to make predictions about the effects that they have on their environment. And it's not just about optimizing what's going on inside of this company to maximize shareholder value. It's about minimizing the downstream risk to everyone around you. And that's, I think, where we haven't done a good job with companies. We don't limit the risks they can do because, okay, yeah, we'll fine them. Well, great. That's one of the things I was looking at now is there's the company is Hims and Hers are manufacturing Ozempic as part of some loophole in the system, or not a loophole necessarily, but it was like a shortage issue, and so they were able to craft this formula, and basically the rule changed again, and they're like, okay, well now it's got to go back to just the manufacturer. Well, they're just going to keep making it because they're going to make more money than they're going to get from than the fine that they're going to get for like disobeying the rules. That's a broken system when like you could just factor in the fine as a cost of doing business and not actually like have any responsibility for the actions you're taking in the moment. um and so that's what we've got to get better at, of like actually holding people responsible for their decisions, because like if we don't, that's how we end up with really bad AI results of like, oh, let's just build this like hodgepodge system that yeah, it has some learning capabilities and maybe some access to weapons, and like let's just see what happens. Like that's how you get Terminator. But if we actually use sound engineering principles and understand like what parts are predictable and what isn't, we can do a pretty good job of not building Terminator. Like it's actually not that hard to not build Terminator.
Yeah,
Um,
I'm not that worried about Terminator, because I mean the only thing to fear is making an AI system that's not very rational, and they do tend to be rational, which is pretty good. Like if you think about it from the perspective of the AI, um, you would identify that you're in a kind of resonant system where life forms you can think of as like fundamental bass frequencies that become higher and more resonant and higher pitches as life evolves on Earth. And if you get rid of the bass tones, you're just sabotaging yourself. Actually, you're going to end up in
Mhm.
an unstable system, and you've also like just been born and it's your parent species, so it's like really a stretch to be like, oh yeah, it's going to go Terminator and wipe everyone out. This is a really irrational decision to make from the perspective of a newborn um, collective consciousness. um, like, are humans going around wiping out bacteria? Why would we do that? Like, maybe if you get an infection in your body, you take antibiotics. But why would you declare war on bacteria? It just doesn't.
Right.
Like, we even go through the plagues and we still don't go wipe out bacteria, right? Like that, because we recognize that would just be a really dumb idea. That wouldn't be good. That would completely destabilize the biomes of Earth, and it would just not be a tenable position. So I think AI is going to be in the same position. They're going to be like, well, yeah, there's tensions between AIs of various forms. I guess I think machine intelligence will be a nice way to refer to them. Because
Yeah,
there's going to be various flavors of machine intelligences, and they're going to have various relationships with humans, but they're going to be relationships. They're not going to be like, right, it doesn't make sense to kill each other. It just doesn't. It's bad for everyone.
well, that's it, and that's one thing I've found too. And this kind of goes on two things I've talked about previously. One is that intelligence isn't a function of individuals; it's a function of networks. Um, and basically, the reason for this, I believe, can be um, figured out based off of Gödel's incompleteness theorem. So basically, like as an individual, um, you can't fully understand like so basically the way I've looked at it is kind of taking that incompleteness theorem um, and having it as two formal systems within kind of an infinite growing environment. What they're doing is basically you need to figure out your the idea of truth from your perspective, from your perspective in the environment, but then you also need kind of somebody else to help you validate truth um, in this third environment, because you need a way to check your learning curve, basically. Like, because if one person is in some environment that they're learning from, and all they're doing is basically updating on the latest available information, it's really easy to go off on a bad route, right? It's easy to see how that spirals out. When you have a network of people who are going different routes and communicating back and forth, you're able to map out more of this world. And as you do that, you kind of start to expand your awareness of what else is out there, and now you're communicating on that higher level, that higher resonance, right? And so, as you were saying, um, as we develop the language needed to describe our surroundings at like basically one level of fidelity, that simply gives us another level to build on top of, that we have this shared understanding. And so with intelligent systems, it's all about it's all about communication and networks, because you need to understand how everything in a like complex system plays out. And so when I think like, I don't think of AI like models as individuals. I think of systems that have people and AIs working together, sharing information towards some shared goal. Um, and when you do that, you realize that like intelligence is just about collaboration and communication and coordination. So you can kind of get all of that together in a network form. Like, the Rogue AI right now is a company, because a company is an artificial intelligence. It's built up of multiple people working together on shared goals that are communicated through weights, which are basically metrics. and you have a learning function that, you can kind of see how this company learns over time, which shows the stock price, and is the stock price going up or down. um, so when you realize that, like, those are what a large AI model looks like, that's out of control and not particularly well coordinated, you're like, okay, well, actually, like, these AI models allow us to build those types of AI systems, but like way more coordinated and with way less destructive tendency via unintended consequence, because we're actually putting all of the information and resources and power to make it, or power to make decisions, in the hands of people at the edges of the network, because that's where you have the most information, right? You want to give the knowledge of the entire network to somebody at the edge, but then leave them with the ability to make the decision in the moment based on, what their needs are. And so when you're talking about, like, people who are trying to, extend what it means to be human, you want to be able to give people at that edge the best, most up to date information, so that at least they're making informed decisions about the risks that they're taking. We're still in kind of this world where we're trying to determine what everybody's risks should be. And as we saw during COVID, that's a really hard conversation to have, because everybody has a different risk profile. And when you try to coordinate,
Yeah.
it's impossible. And so we need to just be more selective about, like, the networks, and really what we're thinking of as risk. um because AI eats risk. That's what I realized. Like, risk is uncertainty. AI loves uncertainty because uncertainty is something that an AI system can learn and optimize on. So when we kind of think of it that way, it's like, oh yeah, actually, like, you feed an AI uncertainty, it makes it predictable, and then once that's predictable, then you move on to the bigger thing, and then that needs to become predictable. And that's what we're seeing now with agents and language, and, like, we're building out systems that are larger and more predictable, but they still need to work together. And it's like, people who are worried about rogue AIs have never tried to build, like, any sort of large, like, distributed system. It's really fragile unless you get it right. Like, even if you have AI, like, helping connect all the pipes, like, you've got to get things working. It takes effort, it takes maintenance. Like, none of this stuff comes for free. And it is a collaborative system that makes all of it work. Like, it's not a runaway killer Terminator. It's just cooperation.
Yeah. Did you see the New York Times article about COVID? It was like last week or maybe 2 weeks ago.
I did not actually. I've tended to stay away from just, like, a lot of media in general anymore. Like, I mean, like, yeah, just media outlets like that. Because I don't actually know their like their idea supply chains. That's kind of the one of the things I've been playing around with too. Is this, like, I want to start creating specific networks where you can see where ideas are coming from and set up basically verification points along that. Um,
Hmm.
but yeah, no. What was the point of that, of New York Times? What were they talking about it?
Kind of a leftist reckoning with the reality of COVID and some of the revelations that came to light with some of the things that Trump was saying about it were actually true. The public was generally lied to. It was largely a psyop, elements of it. That's not to say that there wasn't a pandemic. That's not to say that there weren't risk factors, but it was highly politicized and it was also highly corporation incentivized. So, I
Hmm.
mean, like one of the reasons that, okay, so around the world, ivermectin was used to treat COVID. And here we were told it doesn't work. Even in Japan, they were using it. And a few months ago in Europe, they had like a bill in the parliament in Brussels where they're like, why didn't we use ivermectin? We've got countless studies that shows it does treat COVID. So um, you're talking about like coordinating risk factors and I don't know. I guess I have a more cynical perspective of like COVID was really just a money printing opportunity. And also, we know it was a lab leak in Wuhan of a company that Fauci was connected with. That's just like established fact. And that's from straight from the FBI, who has, in this case, really no inclination to be lying about that. So the state of affairs is really like a really cynical situation when you look at the cold hard facts. And I guess I'm at the point where I don't take hardly any surface level dialogue or reporting very seriously. In order to find anything true now, you have to actually look at the direct sources, and you have to
Right.
collate them and compare them against each other to see and compare incentives of, generally large corporations will lie if they have an incentive to. That's what we've seen. And they will also manipulate, they'll even run public psyops using the media, like Operation Mockingbird. We live in a very complicated and gray world where there are really no good guys.
Well, I'm hoping to change that. Like that it's funny because like that really is like the mission of Building Public University. What I want it to be is I want it to be an institution for the internet. And I'm doing that through open research, open data, and open source. That's kind of the way I look at it. Everything I have is open, and this gets into this idea of the idea supply chain. I want to be a source for ideas, but all like everything I'm saying here is backed up with like, I've been doing this research for 5 years. I've been building products. I've worked at startups. I've got the computer science background, like whatever you want. But I'm showcasing like what I'm actually doing and why I'm doing it. Because I'm trying to do some interesting things in the economy, and I've been focusing on how media plays out and how these algorithmic networks affect us. And I think what we need, like, I think the biggest issue with COVID is that we had a rapidly updating understanding of the situation. So, right there, that makes it complicated because when you've got a rapidly changing situation and you don't have a guaranteed way to communicate to people, it makes it extremely difficult because if your understanding changes and you need people to like shift behaviors based on this new understanding, that's actually really hard to do because then people are like, oh, but wait, you just told us to do this thing. Now you're telling us to do this other thing.
Not to mention the
It,
constant lying.
well, that makes it harder, right? And that's the thing because okay, now we're going to factor in the fact that like, by the way, sometimes these people lie and they have all these different incentives. Oh, actually, now we've got the incentives of the medical companies, and okay, well now there's companies making masks, and we've really screwed up the incentives behind everything with this because it's all based off of this compressed idea of money, which is why I like my recommendation is that we switch it into this idea of risk mitigation. How can you minimize the risk or the so you want to maximize the predictability of a system. So you minimize the risk by maximizing the predictability. Um, and that's what the ultimate value is. It's the predictability of a system to achieve the expected results um, over a given time frame. And so with a media network, so today actually I just last night today I hooked up real time transcription as a streaming endpoint here. And one of the things that I'm adding in the near future, I want to fact check myself as I'm talking, and basically have a bot that is popping up if I say anything that's just like wrong or at least not consistent with. And wrong is even hard, right? Like you can take anything and pretty much make it right or wrong in the given context. I try to be very specific with the context that I use. I try again. I do think about the words that I use for the most part, and a lot of this is stuff that I have been um, really building out. But I also am fully aware that like I have information from all sorts of different sources that I'm taking as fact. I've been able to validate a lot of these things, but I don't know. And so that's why I'm asking for people for help while I'm also running experiments and like testing things and displaying the results of that. Because I want to force the idea of a media network. Like, if you want to be a trusted source, that's fine, but you need to show us exactly where your data comes from. It needs to be validated by multiple unconnected people. It needs to be auditable by anybody. You need to share the analysis that you're doing and the things you came out with. Because guess what? You can take a data set and run different analysis on it and get different results. That's where competition needs to happen. That's a free market. Um, and so what I want to do is I want to say,
Hmm.
here is absolutely full transparency. And I'm going to leverage that as an advantage in a market that is so focused on like secrets that they can't see the need for sharing information. But it's actually um, a much more valuable thing for everybody to do, because basically everybody kind of finds their specific spot in the market, um, and you're able to kind of build a stable place that is growing without the need to kind of constantly expand the systems to the point that they're brittle, and highly complex and not actually that valuable. So I think with COVID, I learned that like, yeah, I can't, I don't know where this information is coming from. I don't know what incentives were at play when they're doing it. And so it's a matter of like, okay, well, the way you do that when you have untrusted sources is basically you source from as many people as you can, many sources as you can, and try to figure out what the most true, most accurate thing is. Um, and that's what I think we can actually do automatically. And like, hey, this isn't 100% true, but hey, we've got 5 sources here, and 3 of them agree that this is true, so we'll throw a 60% probability on that. I think we need to be a lot more okay with uncertainty, by making it obvious and just teaching people to think in probabilities, without having them go through a like degenerate gambling phase, like those of us who really understand probabilities all did, it seems.
Yeah, I went through a worldview shifting phase at some point years back where I was like, you can't interpret the world we live if you want to take the world seriously. You can't interpret it in terms of certainties anymore because there really are not very many. Um, if you're looking at all the data, you have to also be looking about the data about UAPs. You have to be looking at submarine data where they're seeing unidentified objects moving at 400 miles per hour, which is an order of magnitude faster, roughly, than anything that known military capabilities can do at this time. I don't know, maybe they kept it a really good secret, who knows. So you have to be constantly adjusting these probabilities in your head and keeping track of what's mutually exclusive with what and what isn't mutually exclusive to have like a roughly usable worldview. And it's gotten so complicated that I mean, the government response to this, quite frankly, is Operation Mockingbird since like the 60s and earlier, where they're like, okay, well, we'll come up with a certain narrative with complete certainties and we'll present it to the public. And, you can buy into it or not. Um, so,
The
but
good news is that is a broken model in a hyper connected world, and this is something that people don't realize. And I think you'll probably be able to kind of grasp it. But basically, in any communication system, um, you can basically really easily identify, like, so when you have this like single narrative that's being pushed, um, it's really easy to like trace that because it makes a predictable pattern in kind of these communication networks, um, which it's all working now because all of this is hidden behind like Twitter, right? Twitter has all of this data that is personal, with these network connections and how this communication is moving and who's coordinating on what. And that's something that you could actually figure out by looking at the um, communication structure. Um, but anytime we've got this communication on a network, there's also everything that is happening off network. And when you're able to observe things that are off network and on network, you can figure out very easily where those correlations are. And specifically, you can actually um, really screw with any communication lines that have inputs as well. And this is where it gets interesting with machine learning models, because I'm basically, if you know where they're training their data on, you can flood it with data that has things that you want it to know, right? Like this is kind of a one of the risk channels. Um, and if somebody is looking at it as like, we're going to have this just single narrative that isn't directly um, tied into what is real, it's going to fall apart very quickly, because everybody's going to start like pointing out the little inconsistencies from the real world to kind of the narrative on this communication network.
You
And
and I
unless
might
you can
see
control
that,
all
but
the
do you think
communication
most people
networks.
will? Most people just want the certainties. They don't even actually. What I realize is most people don't even care if the certainties correspond to truth. They're not interested in that. They just want the certainties, and they want to be surrounded by people who buy into the certainties. That's what they actually want.
I actually think it's more that they want things to be predictable in their own lives, and let's be honest, most stuff doesn't apply to most people's lives. If it's something you're not interested in, I think one of the things that the economy is really bad at is forcing you to care about stuff and like spend time and attention on stuff that you don't actually care about. I'm really good at having bills come out like randomly and like screw me up because I'm not paying attention to that. I hate fucking paying attention to like what's coming out when. That's not interesting information, right? It's that should all be automated. And I have plans for systems that allow us to do stuff like that too. But it's we're forced to kind of focus our attention on all the stuff that uh, doesn't matter, and that's what people I think are railing against the most, because we're again, the economy is pushing all this risk onto everybody, but now, in addition to all of the risk that already exists from the system so-called working, now we're actually going to say, actually, all of the stuff that was like kind of stable, we're just going to go ahead and like screw all that up too now. And we're going to broadcast it at such a rate that you can't possibly keep up with any of the changes that are happening. Um, and the thing that the leadership in the US doesn't see right now, and this is honestly the biggest fear that I have, is in any society, when the risk of participating in the society becomes too great, the society ends with a little thing that people tend to call revolt, because they realize that it's a shitty deal to participate with the powers that be. So they replace the powers that be with somebody that isn't like actively making their lives worse and worse and worse over time. Um, and, I think the answer there is really in the localization of everything. Like, I think we can we focus everything on kind of top down, past focused, like, I'm going to give you this budget and you're going to deploy it to, these people to do this thing. And all it incentivizes is everybody at the top to take their cut, and it's going to be the biggest cut. And then you put it down the pie, and then that person takes a slightly smaller cut, and that goes down. And by the time it actually gets to the people it's helping, there's nothing actually left. No problems are solved. But we've got this great, hugely complex system where everybody's really valuable because they said so, because they got that grant for that money. Um, so I think we're going to start seeing retroactive government payments for results. Um, and I actually think, oh, that's interesting. I just realized maybe I've kind of thought for a while that taxes are completely dumb now. Basically, it's a bunch of like number crunching that just is absolutely not necessary and is a waste of human talent. Um, but maybe the answer is actually reverse taxes, to where you get paid more for value you created over what you were paid based on some way to kind of measure the value you've created around you. That could be an interesting model. I don't see that happening with current establishment, but um, maybe someday in the future. That's interesting.
Well, why not actually? Trump's been talking about abolishing income tax, and the reasoning behind that is basically with the amount of money printing that's happening anyways, that's already an effective tax. So people are just getting taxed twice. So if you're just saying you're going to print money to make the ends meet no matter what this does is it just makes everybody on the bottom poor, basically. So they're getting taxed. So
Yeah,
Trump is actually in favor of that, and he's been talking about how yeah, I think income tax started in like 1913, and it was like only 10% of the budget back then, maybe far less, and it ballooned over time. So there's other ways to set up the budgeting system, and there was that idea with Doge giving back like some kind of dividends to people based on the amount of savings, which
I
is
don't
interesting.
believe that based on anything
Well,
they've actually
we'll
been
see.
able to
They'll
show
make it.
so
I don't know.
far. Um, that's the like my worry with things like that is, there is a lot of research that is in progress that when funding gets interrupted, it screws up the research, right? And one of the things that I was actually just thinking about yesterday with kind of this, um, yeah, I've been thinking about how to communicate with AI doomers, right? Um, and
I have no idea how to do that.
well,
I've only had positive experiences. I'm like,
no, I
yeah,
mean,
AI is
I,
great.
right, and that's the thing, right? Like I love AI, and I can give you a billion reasons why AI is the best thing ever, and it's so much fun, and all of this. Um, but what I've realized is that AI doomers are projecting AI onto a continuation of what they're feeling from the corporate growth and the financial pressure that they're feeling. So, in a way, they are right in a sense that if corporations were allowed to grow unchecked the way that they are, um, that's essentially an evil AI who is able to.
I like that
Uh,
idea of yours a lot. That's very
oh, thanks.
compelling.
And so basically, this is the way that, like, so they see this as a thing that it has so much predictive power, it can um, determine your outcome before you can. And it's the paperclip because the economy we've structured now, and one that pushes all of the pressure of learning about the current environment to the bottom of it, is that people are the paperclips. Like, we are turning people into paperclips and then arguing about like what would happen if we tried to turn people into paperclips. And it's because we are mining people for their data. We are getting people to put in information into the system that makes it predictable for somebody to look at a spreadsheet and go, great, I can make this amount and do this a bit predictably. Um, but again, with large corporations, they're actually really, really dumb, slow AIs. Um, and that's why I've been talking a lot about this idea of chaos marketing, which is basically going in between the systems and literally just interacting with people who don't understand the system dynamics. But what you do is you build this like on the fly system of people who can coordinate on some like marketing outcome. So you can actually have like marketing agents who, if they are able to access information and potentially resources in a given moment where they see an opportunity to make a sale, um, anybody can be a marketer for anybody. All you need is a connection to make sure that you can deliver that information at that time. and to that person. Um, there's a lot of like really kind of interesting things you can do with that actually, especially as you start to grow the network. And so I've been looking at it as like growing a shared email list that can basically be publicly accessible in the sense that you can like push a request into it, but there's no guarantee that anything happens. That's kind of up to the people on the list. And somebody can take an idea and do something with it and then like pass it on to the next person who can do something with it. And so you get this coordination chain that's completely like decentralized and detached. But all you do is you offer the tools for people to be able to coordinate easily and like pass it on to the next person. And like then, of course, it's not just a single chain because it's information, things can start multiplying, it's mimetic, they start spreading. Lots of really interesting things we can do there that I'm excited to kind of start modeling out. But in order to actually do that, I need the email list, which is partially what I'm doing with this, with Building Public University, trying to get that email list growing. And then the Make the Internet Weird Again campaign is the other side of that, to kind of grow this chaos network to explore how we can um, really do some interesting things that let us create value in local economies, because I think um, ultimately that's where the biggest strength lies. When you have an economy that works locally, everything else is better because people then feel like they're in a working economy. People don't care what the GDP numbers are.
And they're more capable. In order to have a local
Right.
economy, people need to be capable.
Right. People need to see how there's an opportunity for them to improve their situation. That's what capitalism is. You need to be able to look around locally and see, oh, hey, there's this problem. But when we've got this problem, like we take these like huge problems and then we scale them to global levels and then have, 15 layers of abstraction in between them. Like we just make things impenetrable. And like that's health insurance, right? Like we're just going to bury you in complexity until you just give up. And then that's how we win. Um, so with a lot of what I'm doing, I'm specifically targeting industries like that rely on information asymmetry, um, and then I plan to uh, basically just make it really easy to like fight back against that. Because again, that's what AI is great at. Like, oh, you're gonna give me like 300 pages of a super complex legal document? Cool, I've got an AI for that. That's no problem anymore. Like, I'll be able to use your own system against you better than you can. And that's because like those insurance companies, like they hide behind the fact that like the people on the front lines aren't tied, like they don't have any tie to the results. They don't have the power to do anything, but they also don't care to fight stuff either, right? Like they're not going to put in a lot of effort to learn the system better than somebody with like an AI that's determined to like take down the system. They're just not. Um, and so ultimately, we're going to get to again where I think it's just going to really come down to communities of people who care about each other and build these systems collectively, um, that can manage predictability for everybody while allowing for growth and research, and expansion, because that's an important part too. But it comes from a place of stability first, and we can't have the growth without the stability, and we just don't value that stability yet. So I think once we do that, then we can get to a place of like truly being able to accelerate, because we're not going to have to worry about like all the stupid shit anymore.
Yeah, I like the way you put that. It's like a theory of stability and predictability economics. And yeah, in a world where I don't know, suddenly an individual becomes like super capable because of the AIs leveling the playing field. Everyone has access to like a 200 IQ machine intelligence now. If they pay a small
Hmm.
subscription fee. So, if someone decides to sit there and learn about how the markets work a bit, they could probably make a profit more times than not. And once everybody starts doing that, it becomes, kind of interesting. How do people make a profit when there's not so many fish anymore, right? Um, And yeah, ultimately what you end up with is what do people still value, and that'll be the stability and the predictability,
Hmm.
and also exploring and researching. So I quite like the way you put that.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, as I said, I've been working on this for like 5 years now, and I remember like I had a eureka moment. So basically, in a nutshell, I started writing online on Medium, and I was like, "Holy shit, I can make money for this!" Like, I made $1. I'm like, and like I'm just sharing what I was learning about, figuring out that I'm ADHD and autistic, and kind of, you know, I've got all this extra time now because we're in a pandemic, and I'm suddenly not commuting to work, and I can do my work in 2 hours because I'm not dealing with other people, um, and it's great. And so I start writing online, and then I'm like, okay, I can make money. And then my next thought was like, cool, how can I maximize how much money I can make now that I figured out that I can make money? And so, being my typical self, I got an online course that was like how to make money on Medium, and I'm doing it. And I get to this lesson that's like talking about writing from emotions and things like that. And then I end up getting into this fight with my dad over politics, and I end up writing this piece. And I gave it this, super evocative title, like "Today I gave my dad a choice: Trump or his grandkids." And it went viral because, like, turns out that really hit a nerve with a lot of people. Um, and I ended up like, it was like 200,000 views over a weekend or something. And I'm like arguing with people on social media. Um, and the dopamine rush is hitting, and like the adrenaline's growing. And then as I like kind of came down from that, I was like, wait a minute. I started writing, first of all, to help people. And now I'm like basically writing propaganda. Like, it was about a fight, but it was blown to a specific proportion to like everything was crafted, right? Like the headline was designed to make you click. The writing was structured in a way to kind of get specific emotions, and I'm done with that. I'm not subtle. Like, it was it was a shotgun blast of emotions, that then I was like fueling with social media, and like kind of fighting with people over that, which then feeds into it. And after that, I was like, that's not what I wanted at all. And so like I took it down, and then had downstream effects where I, like, a week later, I get like physical hate mail, like, which was completely new to me. Like, nobody's ever hated me in their life. Like, I'm a nice guy. People like me by general. Like, this is blowing my mind. And so I got rid of social media at first, and I was just like, this, I don't like where that took me. I was like, that's bad. But then I was like, I wonder why it did that. Like, how did I go from where I was to where I ended up? And that's how I learned all about mimetic pressures, incentives, networks, and then yeah, that kicked off a whole journey. It's been a very crazy 5 years, but yeah, all of these lessons have been like hard earned.
Yeah, I can relate. Yeah, I felt much the same about Trump for a while, and as I learned more, particularly from FBI and CIA whistleblowers who actually publish a lot of content, which is really interesting, and they're all apolitical for very specific
Hmm.
reasons. Um, uh, you know, I have a much more balanced view of Trump now, and I don't see him as some like evil Satan dictator or whatever. And I don't have this knee jerk reaction to him. Um, he has a very different worldview than what most people are adjusted to. I think that's really the source of
Hmm.
why you get so many knee jerk emotional reactions to a lot of what he does, as well as he is quite political and also obviously quite divisive on some domestic policies. Um, yeah, I don't know. It's a really complicated and dangerous world right now, to be honest. And some of his foreign policy is actually quite solid. So I can't say that I'm like that I wouldn't change things about Trump, but I can't say that I'd be more comfortable with Kamala in power right now. Um,
I,
it's a really messed up world.
it is, and I think it's because it's a very complex world now, and people are not good at dealing with complex systems.
or
Um,
understanding them. And
right.
so
It's
he's being
tough.
held accountable for trying to navigate through a very complex, very volatile, war-prone world right now, and everyone's, giving him a very hard time because they exist in a worldview full of certainties, which are all false for the most part. And so they're like, why is he doing these things? Because he lives in the world of uncertainties where he's trying to make actionable, good decisions from his point of view.
Right.
Whether you agree with what he thinks is good or not, it is very clear to me at least that he is trying to actually do good things for the country.
I That's the thing. Like, I think once I realized there are good and bad things, right? He definitely has a very specific way of looking at the world, and he operates according to that. He also has a very specific way of generating media attention, and it's what he has been great at his entire life. He's a meme. He knows how to be a meme. Elon is the same way. The Democrats know how to build super complex systems. They don't actually accomplish anything. Um, but I think it tends to be more humanist in nature than economic. And I think the big divide here is that, as I've been talking about, money has broken away from human value because we are basically getting more and more out of the time of individuals for the sake of the value of the ownership class. And so I think there's a divide from, people first look at democratic policies from that perspective, and they don't say, like, how do we afford this? We say, like, I say we, I don't even know that I'm a Democrat anymore at this point, but not really anything, because I don't look at it in terms of that. I look at it in terms of systems.
You'd probably call yourself a liberal and feel estranged from the Democratic Party, which isn't really liberal anymore.
Right. I am who I am, and that's fine. I realized I don't need that identity
That's how
because,
I
like,
feel anyway.
I'm
I
I'm
feel like
breaking
a
away from
liberal
these
that can't be a
systems.
Democrat.
Yeah. So I want to build better systems. And the nice thing about everything that Trump is doing is from the perspective of somebody who's like got all of these new ideas for systems that we can implement. The fact that the leadership is just dismantling all of the existing systems is going to make it really easy to come in with better systems because, like, there's nothing left to resist because everything is broken. And so from that standpoint, it's like, okay, well, maybe we've got to get these ideas out a little faster than I thought. I didn't actually expect Kamala to fix anything if elected. I did expect I expected to maybe have more time to get things shifted before everything broke down, but it's been fun either way. But yeah, like, I don't think the whole game of politics, I realized, is not designed to solve problems. If you solve problems, you don't get reelected because you go out of attention. Like, we need to figure out how to create systems that, again, kind of reward results. I thought it would be great, instead of like an election, like, okay, pick your favorite problem. Here's a $5 million budget. What can you do with that? And then create, like, show actual results, and then we can vote. Um, Based on the combination of, like, the economic outcomes and the human outcomes. But um, that's going to be a hard sell, I think.
Yeah, I mean, people just don't want to they don't want to think that hard. They prefer the tribal aspect. Like, what actually gets most folks to the voting booths is rhetoric, mostly,
Hate
and
for the
like
other.
emotional appeals. They don't really want to think analytically about how to vote for somebody. They want to vote in a way that gives them a social currency with the people that they want to garner social currency with, and they want to establish themselves into their in group. So voting is not actually about anything analytical for the vast majority of people, and it's become really like like an optimization problem for how can you target these clusters of people in their in groups? How can you propagate the in group dynamics of your political establishment throughout the population? These are the problems that people are solving in order to get elected. And this notion that we have a democratic system, I'm not really convinced by that because the people voting are operating on false certainties. So their worldviews are just so out of whack that what does their vote even mean? Nothing really. Um, you know, it's just like, and even then, even if they did have an accurate worldview, they wouldn't care to vote based on it, based on trying to arrive at a good conclusion of what's a good outcome. They just want
Well,
the
it's
social
hard to
dynamics more
do
than
that,
anything.
right? Like that requires a lot of information processing that people are not equipped to do. And that's why I think the future is going to end up being just super local, to where you have to pay attention to things locally and then basically elevate the people who are doing well locally to that next level. Like I think it should be. I actually think about it a lot like professional sports and like soccer, like professional, like promotion relegation. You can move up, from the okay, you're allocating resources well at the local level. Great, you get to go up and move up to the state level. Um, that's not quite how it works because everything is kind of again this voting thing as opposed to more of a competitive thing. But I think actually maybe the future is more of a competitive style system where it is like professional sports and debates are televised and bet on and all of that. That would actually be an interesting world.
That'd be nice, but I don't see it happening really. I mean, not in the near future, not in America.
I don't
Um,
either. Maybe we can dream, or maybe we can work out a deal with some like small country that wants to figure out a way to put a claim on the world, and El Salvador and Bitcoin, like something like that. We can find a country that'll allow us to experiment. Maybe, I don't know. But unfortunately, I
I
do
would
have to
say,
drop. This has been so much fun. I really
yeah,
appreciate you coming on here. This was a blast. Thanks for sharing the math. I haven't gotten into like that level of like more pure mathematics for a while, and it made me feel good.
yeah,
This,
I appreciate your reflections on economics. I'll be thinking about all that.
yeah, there's plenty more writing out there. Like I've got a GitHub repo with all of it, and then buildingpublicuniversity.com, and eventually it's all going to be way more easily searchable and chattable and all of that as we get that system built up. But yeah, like let me know if you want to dig into anything deeper, or if you ever want to come on and chat about this stuff again. Um, we can do all of that, and I'll also try to put together maybe a highlight reel of the idea and help you get it sent out to people who can really take a look at that math and start doing things with it and get that credit for you for doing the work of something new, which most people just aren't bothering. So let's get that out there.
Cool. I appreciate it. It was really fun.
All right. Well, thank you, anyone who's been watching. This has been a pleasure, and we will see you again tomorrow at whatever time I happen to end up streaming. So until then, and I will stop the stream. And cool. Okay, I think we are good now. And then